Hook, in the shadowed corridors of Kensington Palace, where secrets whisper through ancient stone walls, a single piece of jewelry holds the power to shatter a kingdom. The midnight sapphire, once worn by a beloved queen who died too young, now rests on the finger of a woman many believe unworthy of its legacy. But when palace guard Marcus Thornfield witnesses something that could change everything, the very foundation of the royal family begins to tremble. The rain pelted against the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Marcus Thornfield made his final rounds of the evening. 23 years he had served the royal family, watching princes grow into kings and witnessing the rise and fall of those who sought power within these ancient walls. Tonight felt different, though he couldn't quite place why. His footsteps echoed softly on the polished marble floors as he approached the East Wing, where Queen Consort Isabella resided. The hallway was dimly lit, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with each flicker of the ornate chandeliers. Marcus had always prided himself on his discretion, a quality essential for anyone who worked within the inner circles of royalty. As he rounded the corner near the Queen Consort's private study, voices drifted through the partially open door. Marcus paused, not out of curiosity, but because protocol demanded he ensure the royal family's safety at all times. What he heard made his blood run cold. "You must understand, Isabella, that ring was never meant for you." The voice belonged to someone Marcus recognized, Lord Pemberton, the Queen Consort's private advisor, a man whose loyalty had always seemed questionable. "The midnight sapphire belongs to me now," came Isabella's sharp reply. "Eleanor is gone. Her precious ring should have been buried with her, but since it wasn't, it's mine by right of marriage." Marcus felt his chest tighten. Queen Eleanor, Prince Alexander's first wife, had died in a tragic car accident 5 years ago. The entire kingdom had mourned her loss, and the midnight sapphire, a ring that had been in the royal family for over 3 centuries, had been her most treasured possession. It was said to bring protection and wisdom to whoever wore it, but only if they were pure of heart. The people still love her memory. Lord Pemberton continued, his voice taking on a warning tone. "If they knew the truth about that night, they will never know," Isabella interrupted sharply. "We've made sure of that." Marcus pressed himself closer to the wall, his heart hammering in his chest. What truth? What had happened that night 5 years ago when Queen Eleanor died? "Alexander suspects nothing?" Lord Pemberton asked. "The king is too consumed with grief and duty to question what he's been told," Isabella replied with a coldness that made Marcus shiver. "Besides, he gave me the ring himself when we married. He said Eleanor would have wanted me to have it." A bitter laugh escaped Isabella's lips. If only he knew what Eleanor really wanted. "The letter she left, one you made sure never reached him, it would have destroyed everything we've built." Marcus felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath his feet. A letter? Queen Eleanor had left a letter that the king never received? His mind raced as he tried to process what he was hearing. The beloved queen's death had shaken the entire kingdom, but if there was more to the story... Speaking of which, Isabella's voice dropped to a whisper. But Marcus could still hear every word. "I want you to destroy any remaining evidence. The private investigators report, the witness statements that were never filed. Everything. Burn it all." "That's dangerous," Lord Pemberton warned. "If anyone ever found out we suppressed evidence about the Queen's death."
"No one will find out because there will be nothing left to find," Isabella said firmly. "I've worked too hard to get where I am to let the ghost of a dead woman destroy my position." Marcus felt sick to his stomach. The woman he had sworn to protect, the woman who now wore the crown of England as Queen Consort, was speaking about Queen Eleanor as if she were nothing more than an obstacle that had been removed. "What about Prince Oliver?" Lord Pemberton asked, referring to Queen Eleanor's son from her previous marriage, whom she had brought into the royal family. "He's been asking questions about his mother's death lately. He's 25 now, old enough to demand answers." "Oliver is a problem," Isabella admitted. "But he has no real power. He's not in line for the throne, and his stepfather dotes on him too much to see him as a threat. Still, we need to be careful. If he starts digging, I can arrange for him to be sent abroad," Lord Pemberton suggested. "A diplomatic mission, perhaps. Something that would keep him busy and far away from London." "Do it," Isabella commanded. "And make sure it's somewhere remote. The farther from England, the better." Marcus had heard enough. He carefully backed away from the door, his mind reeling with the implications of what he had just discovered. Queen Eleanor's death might not have been the accident everyone believed it to be. There was a letter that King Alexander never received, evidence that had been suppressed. And now Prince Oliver was in danger. As he made his way back to the security office, Marcus struggled with what to do next. His oath was to protect the royal family, but which members of the family deserved that protection? King Alexander, who seemed to be living a lie, Prince Oliver, who appeared to be in danger, or Queen Consort Isabella, who might be responsible for the death of the previous queen. The next morning dawned gray and misty, matching Marcus's mood as he reported for duty. He had barely slept, his mind churning over the conversation he had overheard. During his years of service, he had witnessed many palace intrigues, but nothing that had suggested murder within the royal family itself. As he took his position in the main hall, King Alexander descended the grand staircase. At 52, the king still cut an imposing figure, though the weight of the crown and his personal losses had added silver to his hair and lines to his face. He moved with the practiced grace of someone born to rule, but Marcus could see the sadness that still lingered in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. "Good morning, Marcus," the king said with a genuine smile. "I trust all was quiet last night?" "Yes, your majesty," Marcus replied, the lie burning on his tongue. "All quiet." King Alexander paused, studying Marcus's face with the intuitive gaze that had made him a respected leader. "You look troubled, my friend. Is everything well?" For a moment, Marcus considered telling him everything right there in the hallway. King Alexander had always been fair and just, and he deserved to know the truth about his wife's death. But the magnitude of what Marcus had learned made him hesitate. Such accusations required proof, and right now, all he had were overheard conversations. "Just tired, your majesty," Marcus said finally. "Perhaps I'm getting too old for night shifts." The king laughed, a sound that seemed to lighten the heavy atmosphere of the palace. "Nonsense. You're the most reliable man I have. Besides, 23 years of service has earned you the right to choose your own schedule." As King Alexander walked away, Marcus felt the weight of his knowledge pressing down on him like a physical burden. The king's kindness only made his dilemma more painful. How do you tell a man that the woman he married might have been responsible for his first wife's death?
Later that morning, Marcus sought out Prince Oliver, finding him in the palace library, where he often spent his time researching historical documents for his graduate studies in medieval history. The young man looked up from a thick manuscript as Marcus entered, his green eyes, so like his mother's, brightening with recognition.
"Marcus," Oliver said warmly, rising to shake the guard's hand. "How are you? You look like you haven't slept." "I'm fine, your highness," Marcus replied, though his voice lacked conviction. He studied the young prince's face, seeing so much of Queen Eleanor in his features. Oliver had her compassion, her intelligence, and her stubborn determination to see justice done. "I wanted to ask you something," Marcus said carefully, glancing around to ensure they were alone. "Have you noticed anything unusual about Queen Consort Isabella lately?" "That's an interesting question, Marcus. Why do you ask?" "Just curious," Marcus said. But Oliver's penetrating gaze told him the prince wasn't buying his casual tone. "You know," Oliver said slowly, "I've been doing some research lately about the night my mother died." The official reports seem incomplete. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "In what way?" Oliver moved to a nearby table where several documents were spread out. "I've been using my academic connections to access police files and witness statements." "There are gaps, Marcus. Important information that seems to have been deliberately omitted." "What kind of information?" Marcus asked, moving closer to examine the documents. "My mother's car was found at the bottom of Blackwater Ravine," Oliver explained, pointing to a map. "But here's the thing. She was an excellent driver, and she knew those roads like the back of her hand. She'd driven that route hundreds of times. The official report says she lost control due to wet conditions, but the weather that night was clear." Marcus examined the documents, his heart sinking as he realized the implications. "What else have you found?" "There was a witness," Oliver continued, his voice growing excited. "A local farmer who said he saw another car on that road around the time of the accident. But his statement was never included in the final report, and when I tried to contact him, I was told he'd moved abroad immediately after giving his initial statement." The pieces were beginning to form a horrifying picture in Marcus's mind. "Oliver," he said carefully, "I need you to promise me something. Whatever you're investigating, be very careful who you trust." The prince looked at him sharply. "Marcus, do you know something about my mother's death?" Before Marcus could answer, the library door opened, and Queen Consort Isabella swept in, her presence immediately changing the atmosphere in the room. She wore a deep blue dress that perfectly complemented the midnight sapphire on her finger, the ring catching the light as she moved. "Oliver, darling," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I've been looking everywhere for you. Your stepfather wants to see you in his study."
Of course, Oliver replied politely, but Marcus noticed how his jaw tightened. I'll be right there. Isabella's gaze moved to the documents spread across the table, and Marcus saw a flicker of something. Fear? Anger? Cross her features. Still playing historian, I see. Dwelling on the past isn't healthy, especially when it concerns such painful memories. Understanding the past helps us learn from it, Oliver replied evenly. My mother always said that truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. The tension in the room was palpable as stepmother and stepson stared at each other. Finally, Isabella's smile returned, though it seemed more forced than before. Well, don't keep your father waiting, she said, turning to leave. As she passed Marcus, she paused. And Marcus, I trust you'll remember your duty to protect this family's reputation.
After she left, Oliver and Marcus exchanged meaningful looks. She knows. Oliver whispered.
Yes, Marcus agreed grimly. And that makes you very dangerous to her. The young prince began gathering his documents.
Then we need to work fast. If my mother was murdered, the truth needs to come out, no matter the consequences. As Oliver hurried off to meet King Alexander, Marcus remained in the library staring out the window at the palace gardens where Queen Eleanor used to walk every morning. Somewhere in this vast palace, evidence of a terrible crime was hidden, and a killer walked free, wearing the crown and the ring of her victim. The guard knew that his simple life of protecting the royal family had just become infinitely more complicated. The very people he was sworn to protect might include a murderer, and the only way to honor his oath was to ensure that justice was served, even if it meant bringing down the monarchy itself. That evening, as Marcus made his rounds once again, he noticed that extra security had been placed around Prince Oliver's quarters. When he inquired about it, he was told that the queen consort was concerned about the prince's safety and wanted additional protection. But Marcus knew better. Those guards weren't there to protect Prince Oliver. They were there to watch him. And if Isabella was moving this quickly to contain the situation, it meant that time was running out. Soon, either the truth would come to light, or those who sought it would find themselves silenced forever. The midnight sapphire glittered on Isabella's finger like a beacon of stolen glory, but Marcus vowed that it would not remain there much longer. Queen Eleanor deserved justice. King Alexander deserved the truth. And Prince Oliver deserved to live long enough to see both delivered. The game had begun, and Marcus Thornfield, a simple palace guard, found himself at the center of a conspiracy that could shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. 3 days had passed since Marcus overheard the damning conversation between Queen Consort Isabella and Lord Pemberton. During those 3 days, the palace had felt like a powder keg waiting to explode. Marcus had noticed increased security around certain areas, hushed conversations that stopped when he approached, and most concerning of all, Prince Oliver had been conspicuously absent from his usual haunts. Marcus finally located the prince in the palace's old chapel, a small stone sanctuary that dated back to the 14th century. Oliver knelt before the altar where a portrait of his mother hung, surrounded by fresh white roses, her favorite flowers. The young man's shoulders shook with barely contained emotion. She used to bring me here when I was young, Oliver said without turning around, somehow sensing Marcus's presence. She said this was the only place in the palace where she felt truly peaceful. Marcus approached slowly, his footsteps echoing softly off the ancient stones. Your Highness, we need to talk. Privately. Oliver rose and faced him, and Marcus was struck by how much the young man had aged in just 3 days. The carefree academic had been replaced by someone who carried the weight of terrible knowledge. I know. Oliver said simply, I know she killed my mother. The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Marcus felt both relief and dread at having his suspicions confirmed. How? Marcus asked. Oliver reached into his jacket and pulled out a weathered envelope. I found this yesterday hidden in my mother's personal effects that were stored in the tower vault. It's a letter she wrote but never sent, dated the day before she died. With trembling hands, Oliver opened the envelope and began to read aloud. My dearest Alexander, by the time you read this, I pray you will understand why I had to take this step. I have discovered something about Isabella that I cannot ignore. Something that threatens not just our marriage, but the very stability of the crown. The documents I found in her private safe prove that her first marriage was never legally dissolved. She is still married to Count Victor Petrov, which means our marriage is invalid, and she has no claim to the throne. Oliver's voice cracked as he continued. I know this revelation will cause a scandal, but I cannot live with this deception. I have copies of all the evidence hidden in a safe place. Isabella must be confronted with the truth. I only hope that when she is, she will go quietly.
I fear what she might do if cornered. If anything happens to me, know that I love you and Oliver more than life itself. The truth must come to light. Eleanor. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus felt as though the very foundations of everything he believed had just crumbled beneath his feet. She knew, Marcus whispered. Your mother discovered that Isabella was already married, making her marriage to Alexander bigamous and her claim to be queen consort completely fraudulent. Oliver finished. But my mother died before she could expose the truth. Where are these documents your mother mentioned? Marcus asked. That's what I've been trying to figure out, Oliver replied, carefully folding the letter. She said she hid copies in a safe place, but I have no idea where. I've searched her old rooms, the library, even the chapel. Nothing. Marcus thought for a moment. Your mother was intelligent and careful. She would have hidden them somewhere Isabella would never think to look, but somewhere you might eventually find them. I've been racking my brain for days, Oliver said in frustration. Where would she hide something that important? As they spoke, the chapel door opened with a creak, and both men turned to see King Alexander enter. The monarch looked haggard, his usually perfect appearance showing signs of strain. His eyes were red-rimmed and his normally steady hands shook slightly. Oliver, Marcus, he said, his voice hoarse. I was told I might find you here. Father, Oliver said carefully, using the title he had adopted after his mother's marriage to Alexander. Are you well? The king laughed bitterly. Well? I'm not sure I know what that means anymore. He moved to stand before his late wife's portrait, his gaze fixed on her painted face. I've been thinking about Eleanor. A lot lately. Remembering things, questioning things I should have questioned years ago. Marcus and Oliver exchanged glances. Could it be that the king was beginning to suspect something? What kind of things, Your Majesty? Marcus asked gently. Alexander turned to face them, and in his eyes was a pain so deep it was almost unbearable to witness. The night Eleanor died, she called me. I was in a meeting with Parliament members discussing the upcoming trade negotiations. I told her I would call her back when I was finished. His voice broke slightly. I never got the chance. By the time my meeting ended, she was already dead. But I keep thinking about that call. She sounded frightened. Urgent. She said she needed to tell me something important, something that couldn't wait. Oliver stepped forward. Father, what if I told you that Mother did have something important to tell you? Something that might have cost her her life. The king's eyes sharpened. What are you saying? I'm saying that Mother's death might not have been an accident, Oliver said, pulling out the letter. And I have proof. For the next hour, Oliver shared everything he had discovered. The letter, the evidence of Isabella's existing marriage, the suppressed witness statements, the mysterious disappearance of the farmer who saw another car that night. With each revelation, King Alexander's face grew paler, his anger more evident. My God, the king whispered when Oliver finished. All this time I've been living a lie. Married to the woman who... He couldn't finish the sentence. We need to find the documents your mother mentioned, Marcus said. Without them, we only have accusations and circumstantial evidence. King Alexander was quiet for a long moment, staring at the portrait of his late wife. Then, suddenly, his face brightened with understanding. The music box, he said suddenly. Eleanor had an antique music box that played her favorite song, Claire de Lune. It was the only thing she insisted on bringing from her previous home when we married. She said it contained her most precious memories. Oliver's eyes widened. I remember that music box. She kept it on her dressing table, but after she died, I never saw it again. Isabella had all of Eleanor's personal items packed away, Alexander said grimly. She said it was too painful for me to see them every day. The music box would have been among them. But where would it be now? Marcus asked. The Dowager's Tower, Alexander said with certainty. It's where all the previous queen's belongings are stored. If the music box is anywhere, it would be there. The Dowager's Tower was one of the oldest parts of the palace, a circular stone structure that had served various purposes over the centuries. Currently, it housed the personal effects of deceased royals, a sort of mausoleum for memories. We need to get to that tower, Oliver said urgently. It won't be easy, Alexander warned. Isabella has the only key, and the tower is always guarded. Leave that to me, Marcus said. I know the guard rotations, and there's a 15-minute window during the shift change when the tower is unmonitored. As they made plans for their midnight expedition, none of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows outside the chapel window. Lord Pemberton lowered his binoculars and hurried back toward the main palace, his mind racing with what he had observed. 20 minutes later, he stood in Queen Consort Isabella's private drawing room delivering his report. "They have the letter," he said without preamble.
Eleanor's letter, and they're planning to search the Dowager's Tower tonight. Isabella, who had been calmly arranging flowers, froze.
A crystal vase slipped from her fingers and shattered on the marble floor, sending white orchids and water cascading across the polished surface. "How is that possible?" she hissed.
"We searched everywhere after Eleanor's death, every room, every hiding place." "Apparently not everywhere," Pemberton replied grimly.
"If they find those documents." "They won't," Isabella said with deadly calm. "Make sure of it."
What do you want me to do? Isabella walked to her window, looking out at the Dowager's Tower in the distance.
The midnight sapphire on her finger caught the afternoon light, sending blue sparkles dancing across the walls. "Increase security around the tower. Triple the guard detail. And if anyone tries to enter without my express permission..." She paused, her reflection in the window showing a smile that was anything but pleasant. "Well, accidents happen. Even to royalty." "Isabella, you can't seriously be considering..." "I've come too far to lose everything now." She cut him off. "Eleanor's ghost has haunted me for 5 years. It's time to put her to rest permanently." That evening, as the palace settled into its nighttime routine, Marcus made his final preparations. He had managed to acquire a master key from the security office, claiming he needed to check all the locks as part of a security audit. The guard rotation schedules were memorized, and he had identified the safest route to the tower. At 11:30, he met King Alexander and Prince Oliver at the chapel. Both men were dressed in dark clothing, their faces grim with determination. "Remember," Marcus whispered as they made their way through the shadowed corridors, "we have exactly 15 minutes once we're inside the tower. After that, the next guard shift begins." They moved like ghosts through the palace, avoiding the main hallways and sticking to the servants' passages that Marcus knew by heart. The Dowager's Tower loomed ahead of them, its ancient stones black against the starlit sky. As they approached the tower entrance, Marcus suddenly held up his hand, signaling them to stop. Something was wrong. There should have been no guard at this time, but he could see a figure standing in the shadows near the door. "Change of plans," he whispered. "There's extra security." King Alexander's jaw tightened. "She knows we're coming. Then we find another way in," Oliver said with determination. "There has to be another entrance," Marcus thought quickly. "There is. The old tunnel system. It connects all the original buildings in the palace complex. There's an entrance in the dungeon level that leads directly to the tower's basement. Getting to the dungeon required backtracking through the palace and descending several levels below the main structure. The air grew cold and damp as they descended, the stone walls weeping with moisture that had accumulated over centuries. The tunnel Marcus led them through was narrow and low, forcing them to move in single file. Their flashlights cast eerie shadows on the ancient stonework, and more than once they had to step over puddles of stagnant water. "Here," Marcus said finally, stopping before a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. "This leads to the tower's basement." The door opened with a groan that seemed to echo through the entire structure.
Beyond lay a circular room filled with wooden crates and cloth-covered furniture.
Dust motes danced in the beams of their flashlights, and the air smelled of age and forgotten memories. "Eleanor's things would be on the upper levels," Alexander said, his voice strange and hollow in the confined space. They climbed a narrow spiral staircase that wound around the tower's inner wall. On the second level, they found what they were looking for. Dozens of trunks and cases bearing small plaques with Queen Eleanor's name and dates. "There," Oliver said, pointing to a small trunk near the window. "I can see the music box." The trunk was locked, but Marcus made quick work of it with a tool from his security kit. Inside, nestled among silk scarves and jewelry boxes, was the music box Oliver remembered from his childhood. It was an exquisite piece, carved from dark wood and inlaid with mother of pearl. When Oliver lifted the lid, the mechanism began to play the haunting melody of Clair de Lune. But it was what they found hidden in the false bottom that made their hearts race. A manila envelope, sealed with red wax and bearing Eleanor's personal seal. Inside were photocopies of marriage certificates, immigration documents, and legal papers that proved beyond doubt that Isabella had never divorced her first husband, Count Victor Petrov, before marrying King Alexander. "She's been living as a bigamist for 8 years, Alexander said, his voice filled with disgust. "Our entire marriage is a fraud." But Oliver had found something else in the music box. A small digital recorder. When he pressed play, they heard Queen Eleanor's voice clear and strong. "If you're listening to this, then something has happened to me, and the truth needs to be told. Isabella threatened me tonight. She said that if I exposed her secret, she would make sure I never saw another sunrise. I'm not a fool. I know what that means. But I also know that the truth must come out. The monarchy cannot be built on lies and murder." The recording continued for several more minutes, detailing Isabella's threats and Eleanor's plan to expose the fraud. When it ended, the three men sat in stunned silence. "We have her," Oliver said finally. "We have everything we need to prove she's a fraud and a murderer." "Yes," Alexander agreed, his voice hard with resolve. "But we need to be careful how we proceed. If Isabella realizes what we've found—" His words were cut off by the sound of footsteps on the stairs below. Multiple sets of boots moving quickly and purposefully upward. "They found us!" Marcus whispered urgently. "We need to get out of here. Now." But as they gathered the evidence and prepared to flee, they realized with growing horror that the footsteps were coming from both above and below. They were trapped in the tower, with nowhere to run and damning evidence that would cost them their lives if it were discovered. The game had just become deadly serious, and Queen Consort Isabella was making her final move to eliminate everyone who threatened her stolen throne. The footsteps grew louder as armed guards ascended from below while others descended from above. Marcus quickly assessed their situation. They were trapped on the second level of the Dowager's Tower, with nowhere to run and evidence that would expose the greatest royal scandal in centuries. "The window," Marcus whispered urgently, pointing to the narrow opening that looked out over the palace grounds. "It's our only chance." King Alexander looked at the window skeptically. "That's a 20-foot drop onto stone pavement. Better than the alternative," Oliver said grimly, clutching the manila envelope containing his mother's evidence. "If Isabella's guards find us here," Marcus was already working on opening the ancient window latch. The metal was corroded with age, but his security training had taught him how to deal with such obstacles. With a sharp crack, the window swung open, letting in the cold night air. "I'll go first," Marcus said. "There's a drainage pipe that runs down the side of the tower. If we're careful, we can climb down without being seen." The sound of boots on stone was getting closer. They could hear muffled voices and the metallic clink of weapons. Marcus swung his leg over the windowsill and began his descent, testing each handhold carefully. The drainage pipe was old but solid, and after what felt like an eternity, his feet touched the ground. "Clear," he whispered up to the others. Prince Oliver came next, moving with surprising agility for an academic. The envelope containing the evidence was safely tucked inside his jacket. King Alexander followed, though his descent was more cautious due to his age and unfamiliarity with such physical exertion. They had barely reached the ground when lights began flashing in the tower window above them. Angry shouts echoed through the night air as Isabella's guards discovered their escape route.
"This way!" Marcus led them through the shadows toward the main palace, but as they rounded the corner, they found their path blocked by more guards.
Lord Pemberton stood with them, his face cold and determined in the moonlight. "Going somewhere, gentlemen?" he asked with mock politeness. "Her Majesty is most eager to speak with you." They were escorted at gunpoint back to the palace, but instead of being taken to the throne room or any of the official chambers, they were led to Isabella's private apartments. The Queen Consort waited for them in her sitting room, still dressed in her evening gown, the midnight sapphire glittering on her finger like a blue star. "Alexander, darling," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Out for a midnight stroll? How unlike you." "Stop the act, Isabella," King Alexander said, his voice filled with disgust. "We know everything. About Viktor Petrov, about your bigamous marriage, about what you did to Eleanor. This is—" Isabella's composure never wavered, but Marcus noticed her hand move instinctively to touch the sapphire ring. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about." Oliver stepped forward, pulling out his mother's letter. "This is what we're talking about. A letter from my mother, written the day before she died, explaining how she discovered your secret."
"How touching," Isabella replied coolly. Eleanor always was prone to fantasies.
"But a letter proves nothing. It's simply the word of a dead woman against mine."
What about the legal documents proving you never divorced your first husband?" Alexander demanded. "What about the recording of you threatening Eleanor's life?" For the first time, Isabella's mask slipped slightly.
Her eyes flashed with genuine anger. "You have no idea what you're meddling with.
Eleanor was going to destroy everything. The monarchy, the stability of the realm, all for her precious principles. So you killed her,
Oliver said, his voice shaking with rage. You murdered my mother to protect your lie. Isabella stood and walked to the window, looking out at the palace grounds where she had reigned as an illegitimate queen for 8 years. Eleanor's death was unfortunate, but necessary. She would never have understood that sometimes the greater good requires difficult choices. The greater good? Alexander exploded. You're a fraud and a murderer. You've made a mockery of everything the crown represents. Have I? Isabella turned back to face them, her eyes blazing with conviction. I've been a perfect queen consort for 8 years. I've supported your reign, strengthened international relations, and maintained the dignity of the crown. What does it matter how I came to this position? It matters because it's built on lies and murder, Marcus said, speaking for the first time since their capture, and because the truth always comes out eventually.
Isabella looked at him with interest.
Ah, the loyal guard. 23 years of faithful service, and this is how you repay the royal family?
By participating in a conspiracy against your queen.
You're not my queen, Marcus replied firmly. You never were. Isabella's laugh was cold and bitter.
Such noble sentiments, but unfortunately, none of you will be alive to share them with the world. The guards moved closer, their hands resting on their weapons. Lord Pemberton stepped forward with a document in his hand. I've prepared statements for each of you, he announced. Confessions detailing how you conspired to overthrow the legitimate government and replace it with a pretender to the throne. Very tragic that you chose to resist arrest and had to be shot while trying to escape. You can't seriously think you'll get away with this, Oliver said desperately. People will ask questions. The Parliament, the press, the public. The public will be told that a group of conspirators attempted to destabilize the monarchy with false accusations and forged documents. Isabella replied smoothly. They'll believe it because they want to believe in the stability of the crown, and any inconvenient evidence will disappear with you. But as Lord Pemberton raised his weapon, a new voice cut through the tension in the room. I don't think so. Everyone turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows of the adjoining chamber. It was Lady Catherine Worthington, the palace's head of protocol and one of the most respected members of the royal household. Behind her stood a dozen of the palace's most senior guards, men whose loyalty to the crown was absolute and unquestionable.
Lady Catherine, Isabella said, her composure finally cracking. This doesn't concern you. On the contrary, Lady Catherine replied, her voice ice cold. A conspiracy against the rightful monarch concerns me very much, as does the presence of armed men threatening the king's life. These men are traitors, Lord Pemberton protested, still holding his weapon. The only traitors I see are those who would harm King Alexander, Lady Catherine said calmly. She gestured to her guards, who immediately moved to surround Isabella's men. Lower your weapons and step away from His Majesty. How did you know? Isabella demanded, her facade finally crumbling completely. Did you really think you could murder a beloved queen and live as an imposter for 8 years without anyone noticing?
Lady Catherine asked. I've been investigating Eleanor's death from the beginning.
I knew she had discovered something important before she died, and I've been waiting for the right moment to act. She turned to King Alexander. Your Majesty, I have been in contact with several international law enforcement agencies regarding the whereabouts of Count Victor Petrov. He is very much alive and has been quite cooperative in providing evidence of his marriage to the woman you know as Isabella. Isabella's face went white. Victor would never... Wouldn't he? Lady Catherine smiled coldly, especially when faced with charges of conspiracy to commit fraud and accessory to murder. He was quite eager to distance himself from your crimes. The room fell silent except for the sound of Isabella's ragged breathing. The woman who had worn the crown of England for 8 years suddenly looked older, smaller, defeated. It's over, Isabella, Alexander said quietly. Return the ring. Isabella looked down at the midnight sapphire on her finger, the symbol of everything she had fought to achieve and everything she was about to lose. For a moment it seemed she might refuse, but then her shoulders sagged in defeat. With shaking hands, she pulled the ring from her finger and held it out. But instead of giving it to Alexander, she looked at Oliver. Eleanor was right about one thing, she said quietly. This ring should never have been mine. It belongs to those who are pure of heart. Oliver took the ring with reverence, feeling its weight not just in gold and sapphire, but in history and justice. It will be returned to my mother's grave, he said softly, where it belongs. As Isabella and Lord Pemberton were led away in chains, King Alexander stood at the window. looking out at the dawn breaking over his kingdom. The events of the night had aged him, but there was also a sense of relief in his bearing, the relief of a man who had finally learned the truth no matter how painful. What happens now? Oliver asked, joining his stepfather at the window.
Now we begin the long process of healing, Alexander replied.
The Parliament will need to be informed. The public will need to know the truth, and will need to find a way to rebuild trust in the monarchy. Will the crown survive this scandal? Marcus asked, concerned for the institution he had served his entire adult life.
The crown has survived worse, Lady Catherine observed.
800 years of monarchy don't crumble because of one woman's crimes. If anything, the truth coming out will strengthen the institution.
It proves that no one, not even a queen consort, is above the law. In the days that followed, the story dominated headlines around the world.
Isabella's trial revealed the full extent of her deception, not just the bigamous marriage and Eleanor's murder, but years of financial fraud and international conspiracy. Count Victor Petrov testified against her, revealing how she had used her false position to funnel millions from royal accounts into secret offshore investments. The British public, initially shocked by the revelations, ultimately rallied around King Alexander, his obvious grief over Eleanor's murder, and his courage in exposing the truth despite the personal cost earned him unprecedented support. Parliament passed a special resolution commending his dedication to justice and the rule of law. Prince Oliver became a powerful advocate for truth and transparency in government, using his mother's story to push for reforms in how royal marriages and succession were documented and verified. He established the Queen Eleanor Foundation for Justice, dedicated to helping families of murder victims seek answers and closure. Marcus Thornfield was awarded the Order of the British Empire for his role in exposing the conspiracy. When asked by reporters why he had risked everything to pursue the truth, he simply said, "I swore an oath to protect the royal family." Sometimes that means protecting them from those who would do them harm, even when those people wear a crown. The midnight sapphire was indeed returned to Queen Eleanor's grave, where it was interred alongside her remains in a moving ceremony attended by thousands of mourners. King Alexander spoke at the service, his voice breaking as he asked for forgiveness for the years his beloved wife's memory had been dishonored by lies. A year later, as Marcus made his final rounds before retirement, he paused at the chapel where the whole truth had begun to unfold. Queen Eleanor's portrait had been restored to its place of honor, surrounded by fresh white roses that Oliver brought every week. The palace felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the weight of 8 years of lies had finally been lifted. Justice had been served, truth had prevailed, and the crown, though scarred, endured. Marcus smiled as he remembered Isabella's words about the midnight sapphire bringing protection and wisdom to those pure of heart. In the end, the ring had done exactly that. It had protected the truth and brought wisdom to those who sought justice. The ghost of Queen Eleanor could finally rest in peace, and the monarchy she had died trying to protect had emerged stronger than ever. Sometimes, Marcus reflected, the greatest victories come not from protecting lies, but from having the courage to expose them no matter how powerful those lies might be. As he walked away from the chapel for the last time as a palace guard, Marcus carried with him the satisfaction of a man who had kept his most important oath, not just to protect the royal family, but to protect what they truly represented: justice, truth, and the enduring strength of a nation built on the rule of law.